He was having a joke with Barry Horn at the bar saying, like, you know, if you don't buy me a pint, I'm going to shoot you, whatever. Anyway, he ended up pulling the trigger and shooting Barry Horn in the chest at close range with a real bullet.
Welcome to the latest episode of Season 2 of Football Uncovered. In Season 1, we took you inside Blackburn and Leeds, Portsmouth and Liverpool, FIFA and a lot more. Heard about extraordinary stories of football chaos, cock-ups and outright corruption. This season, we're going inside 8 more Premier League clubs, as well as having 2 special episodes. One about life after the Premier League and one about the very future of club football at the highest level. I'm your host, Will Brazier, and with me every episode, of course, it's Nick Harris from Sporting Intel. Nick, are you well?
I'm good, thank you. I'm looking forward to this. We have got a real Everton expert with us.
Yes, obviously it's not just me and Nick. Each week we are joined by a special guest, someone that's either a fan of the club or has followed them very closely and knows all the inside stories. As well as sharing all the usual inside stories about the club, we'll be, of course, looking at the owners of the club, how the current owners came to be there and where they've taken the club so far, but also what's next. Today we're here to talk about Everton, who have more English top flight titles, 9, than any other club apart from Manchester United, Liverpool and Arsenal. Today's guest is James Corbett. James, how are you? And just how did you come to be an Everton fan?
Well, I didn't have any choice in the matter. My family have been following the club since the 19th century. My eldest son is a 6th generation season ticket holder. I work as a sports business correspondent for the website offthepitch.com, but I've also written 3 books about Everton, the club that I grew up with and been fascinated with ever since. I've also collaborated with 4 former Everton players who are all among the club's 10 Millennium Giants on their autobiographies. So Bob Latchford, who was also played for your club, Birmingham, Neville Southall, Howard Kendall, the club's most successful ever manager, and Dave Hickson, a 1950s football legend. I got to meet Neville. There was a meeting set up at a service station on the M25. And anyway, Neville Southall turns up at this service station in the middle of nowhere. And he said, yeah, I read your book. I read loads of books. I really like it. I've written a history of Everton. Really like it. Can you write my book? And I was like, okay. A year or so later, we had a best-selling book called The Bin Man Chronicles. And we would go all over the place promoting this. We went all over the Northwest. We did events at the Welsh Centre in London and all over Wales to do it. And Neville is just one of the most funny people you'll ever meet. He's got a very, very dry sense of humour. So we were in a bookshop in Abergavenny, out of season Abergavenny. Abergavenny's sort of got a reputation as a foodie capital and, you know, being a bit posh because it's close to helm. But actually, it's a bit like Royston Varsey, and full of oddballs. So we were doing this book signing. I don't think many people had turned up. And one of the local oddballs turned up and sort of eyeing Neville and says, why are you doing a book signing? You're not that famous. I don't even know who you are. And Neville's like, well, you know, it's my autobiography, but, you know, people don't know me by my pen name. You know, I write with a pen name. I write novels. But I don't like to use my real name because, you know, I don't like the attention. And this fellow was sucked in by him. And he says, what sort of books do you write? Neville goes, well, you know, fantasy books. You know, they made a few films of them, but, you know, I don't like the attention. He said, what's your pen name? Neville reaches on a bookshop behind and he goes, JK Rowling. And this oddball kept coming back, and you could see him in the window pointing at Neville Southall. It's JK Rowling over there.
I did also help a former Everton footballer write a book. He was in prison at the time. His name is Mark Ward, and he was a tricky winger who started at Everton and got released. He made his name with West Ham in the 80s alongside Frank McAvenny, who was almost as an equally a colourful character as Mark. Mark played for Man City and then went back to Everton in the mid-90s. And he was sent to prison for 8 years in 2005 for his role in a drug cartel. He had a minor role. He was sort of rented the stash house for the cartel so that his name was on the lease, so that when the place got raided, legally anything in the property was his responsibility. Obviously, he couldn't tell the police or anyone who else he was working with, because that would have made him a grass, and bad things happen to grasses in drug cartels. So he went to Walton Jail. I went to see him in Walton Jail for a big feature for The Independent, and one of the stranger but more fascinating times as a journalist. I mean, I had 3 cavity checks on the way from the waiting room to the visitor room,
Wow.
and even before you set off on that journey, you have to take off your shoes. You're allowed 1 layer of clothing, pair of trousers and a shirt. I had to take off my jumper. Didn't have a pen, didn't have a tape recorder, didn't have any coins, and I sat down next to Mark. He was basically chained to a desk and sitting at a desk where he's not allowed to move from. I'm on the other side. Talked to him for an hour. Anyway, he went on to write a book about his extraordinary life, and he said he'd give me an interview if I helped him structure his book. And that's what happened. He went on to write the book by hand on yellow prison notepaper. He'd send me a chapter at a time, and when he got a publisher, somebody who knew from his West Ham days, he helped him with it as well. But there's a brilliant chapter called "Shooting the Pope." I mean, these are different eras when football Christmas parties could still happen without phone cameras and tabloid exposes. But in this chapter, "Shooting the Pope," he tells how it was Christmas fancy dress party at Everton. Barry Horn, we all remember Barry Horn. He came dressed as the Pope, and Mark was obviously, he had a few drinks. He ended up nicking a gun from somebody at the party he didn't know, who was dressed as John Wayne, and he didn't know that the gun that he'd taken from this person who was of dubious sort of provenance was a real gun, and it was loaded. Now, it didn't have a live bullet in it, but it had around it, it was a blank bullet. And he was saying to Barry, he was having a joke with Barry Horn at the bar, saying, like, if you don't buy me a pint, I'm going to shoot you, whatever. Anyway, he ended up pulling the trigger and shooting Barry Horn in the chest at close range with a real bullet, albeit a blank. And there was a massive bang. The robes were in flames. Barry Horn was flung backwards and had a massive bruise in his chest. And this was sort of the normal sort of rough and tumble of an Everton Christmas party in the 80s or whatever. I think we're going to be looking at a more recent period. March 2002, I guess, the start of something, something good, really, a really solid era with the appointment of David Moyes as manager.
Yeah, so it was sort of okay. Walter was a stabilising influence, but Everton weren't really going anywhere. And David Moyes came in March 2002. He still had red hair, and he was really a bright young thing of football managers at the time.
Preston, was it from Preston?
Preston.
Yeah.
And he really re-energised Everton. I mean, Everton in the 2002-2003 season, Everton were in the top 4 for, I'd say, the first 33, 34 games. Right. And they slipped away at the end and finished 7th. But given what had happened over previous seasons, there was real fresh impetus and hope coming into the club. And of course, we had Wayne Rooney, who was, greatest English footballer of his generation, 16-year-old Rooney, who really electrified things at times.
Yeah. I mean, you look at, he was there 11 years, Moyes. We don't want to whip forward too fast, but 7th that first season, having been in the top 4. Bit of a dip season, 17th, but then 4th, 11th, 6th, 5th, 5th, 8th, 7th, 7th, 6th. That's a pretty good record given the resources that Everton had through that period of time, when you are dealing with the Abramovich era starting pretty much as he, the season after he came in, and the established giants of Manchester United and Liverpool and Arsenal. Resources against attainment. It was a very, very solid period, wasn't it?
Oh, it was more than solid. It was very, very good. He continually punched above his weight and never really had any money. There was a bit of money after Rooney came in, and then there was a bit of money when Robert Earl bought into the club in 2006. But he was qualifying for Europe and then literally given nothing. He was bringing in loan signings. He brought in this striker from Argentina called Dennis Stracqualazzi, who I've never seen a player play with such heart, but he had the technique of a non-league player, and he's meant to be playing in a side that's challenging for Europe. But Moyes just about did it, and I think before we started recording, we talked about Leicester City. I think if he'd have had a season where the stars aligned and he had somebody who could bring in the goals, which he never really had in the way that Leicester did with Jamie Vardy, then Everton could have definitely challenged for the title. They had some really, really good players at the time. They just lacked that bit of quality. And then towards the end of his time, I think the dynamics started to really change after Manchester City were taken over by Sheikh Mansour, more so even than when Abramovich came over.
Do you wish that Sheikh Mansour had bought Everton?
I've probably got thousands of Manchester City fans watching this on YouTube, ready to jump on me. I think the club needs to try and stay true to its roots and origins, and in an odd way, and which we'll talk about later, Everton still have under the new owners.
What about the Kirkby Stadium then? What happened there? Why was it so farcical?
Well, Kirkby's a new town on the outskirts of Liverpool. When they did slum clearances in the 50s and 60s, they housed people there, and Liverpool's full of investment snobbery. There's a bit of looking down upon Kirkby as being the wild east of the city. It's cut off, and people are a bit backward and all that, which I don't think is true myself. But anyway, it is definitely remote from Liverpool. It's at the end of a railway line. It's on the side of a motorway, and they were going to build like the biggest Tesco's in Britain with a football stadium attached to it. It was just the worst idea ever. It was a terrible idea, but it was sold to us as, oh, you're getting a stadium for free, blah blah blah. And we were given these images as fans by the club of what it would look like at night with all the things,
all the shoppers,
all the shoppers and all the floodlights. And they said it draws its inspiration from FC Cologne's stadium. I mean, not the Maracanã or the San Siro. FC Cologne. So there you go. And of course, when the Liverpool fans came for the Derby game, they'd all bring Tesco bags, which they'd throw onto the pitch, and they'd sing "The City's All Ours." It really did seem like a retreat from who we are, from the club's core identity as the first and the premier club in our great city.